It's generally a big deal when a fighting game developer gets to license or adapt a series into the genre, or crossover with other fighting game series to put those characters into their own style. And something you'd expect is every character in these collaborative games to be from the series or owners labeled on the tin. But sometimes, those developers get permission to infuse their own new character into these games, as if these new fighters were a part of these universes all along. In short, I want to look at original characters never before seen, made for licensed fighting games or crossover fighting games. Not sure what the official title's gonna be yet, but I'll decide on that later. Basically, these are original characters made to fit into a universe of existing characters within a fighting game that's not just an original fighting game like Street Fighter or Tekken, unless those series are in some sort of crossover already and we get a character from neither of those series in the crossover. Got it? Good. Now let's meet up with the top 10 original characters in licensed or crossover or collab fighting games. Number 10. Asuka from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. As one of the earliest licensed fighting games, TMNT Tournament Fighters still had a lot to work with. Besides the 4 Turtles and Shredder, they took from the different versions of the comics and the cartoon to fill out the roster, with one outlier. There was a ninja lady named Asuka on the roster who wanted to start her own dojo, and she wants to fight the Turtles and their enemies to prove herself as a true ninja. And how does she do it? With her butt. That's right, she's the butt attack character. I love that they had their chance to do anything with the Turtle universe, and they made a lady who hits you with her butt. And I do mean that, it's awesome. She's got a few other attacks with kunai and a shoryuken, but the butt is the highlight. As for why this character was randomly made for this game, allegedly she was going to be the character Mitsu from the 3rd live-action Ninja Turtles movie, but with that movie being poorly received, they dropped the concept and just turned her into something original. One of the developers said that she was based on Rachel from Martial Champion, which I can see. Also, Martial Champion, that's a game I would have never thought of again. Whether she was supposed to be unique from the start or actually Mitsu is still up to rumor, but documentation for the game's development shows her with both names, so that's how the rumors continued. And to note, the spelling of Asuka for this game was always A-S-K-A. The English spelling of the Japanese name Asuka is supposed to have a silent U between the S and K, so they were just spelling it how it sounded, even in the Japanese version of the game. I will say it adds another quirky thing to her besides just having the butt attack. Number 9. Norimaru from Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. Norimaru is a character who is a guest in some regards since he's based on a real person, but his entire design is built from the ground up as a new character for this game. He's a persona of Japanese comedian Noritake Kinashi. I had no idea who he was before Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, and I don't think much of the international audience did either, which is why he was never in the worldwide release of the crossover. But once we got the Marvel vs. Capcom collection, he was now accessible to everyone. The origin is, Noritake drew a sketch of Norimaru at Capcom's headquarters, and they cleaned it up and put it into the game. It was him as a nerdy schoolboy based on one of his acting roles, and he was going around in the Marvel and Capcom worlds, sightseeing in a crossover that he really should have avoided. He is very scared. Since this was Capcom's game, he was more looking for the Capcom characters, specifically Chun-Li, and he just wanted some pictures. Wait, what kind of pictures we talking? But since he was not built for fighting, his entire design is based around accidentally fighting and occasionally remembering he's in a video game. He flails his arms in fear, cowers while an item escapes from his bag, acting as a projectile, slips on a banana peel to launch the opponent, and flings himself upwards diagonally. And if all goes well, he'll get his picture of a famous character. On his own, he's a fun character as a gag, but when it's a crossover between big fighting game and comic book companies, it does feel weird that he's just a guy who's here. Number Number 8. Bad box art Mega Man and Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Street Fighter Cross Tekken is a game that's hard for me to judge fairly at this point. It got dragged so much I can't really view it through a clear lens. I liked the characters picked for the roster, the cutscenes are funny, the way the Tekken characters play are amazing, the tag team mechanic is also fun, but they had a gem power-up mechanic that felt unnecessary, a comeback mechanic which I don't think anyone ever used, and they created DLC characters pre-release and just had them on the disc to be sold later, which was scandalous in 2012, but with modern gaming monetization, it might not stick out as much today. But regarding a controversy with the roster, there was some surrounding their guest characters. The PlayStation version had the PlayStation Cat mascots with Ryu and Kazuya's moveset, which was cute and inoffensive, and Cole McGrath from Infamous, which I discussed on my questionable guest character list, since that choice did kind of annoy me. But for two more guests in all versions of the game, we had Mega Man and Pac-Man, as a reference to the owning companies of both franchises. Mega Man and Street Fighter were owned by Capcom, Pac-Man and Tekken were owned by Namco. Pac-Man was put in a mech based on the Tekken character Mokujin, which was a clever way to get another character in there and make Pac-Man the size of a regular character, but for Mega Man, it was not any version that ever existed. Allegedly, Street Fighter's lead producer at the time, Yoshinori Ono, wanted to put the standard Mega Man in the crossover, but one of Mega Man's creators, Keiji Inafune, wanted something completely different for Mega Man that we've never seen before. So the conclusion was truly something that we've never seen before, since it essentially wasn't Mega Man. It was Mega Man in name only. They took the design of Mega Man from the North American box art when the game was first released, and created a character based around that guy. This artwork was infamous for not looking anything like Mega Man, in part due to a miscommunication, and it was just a generic space fighter man with a handheld laser. It's funny to look at the moveset since they put a smattering of Mega Man's moves on this human with a laser, and they work like they did in the games of origin, just with Street Fighter mechanics. Ice Slasher freezes the opponent temporarily to enable combos, Thunder Beam goes in a square pattern to act as an impediment, and then he still has his Mega Buster firing off the dots as projectiles or larger blasts, and his Shoryuken from Marvel vs. Capcom is here, along with his launcher being the same. Like, the people who made this clearly knew what they were doing in the moveset department. It's just like if something got a live-action adaptation and nothing was like the original except the names and vague elements, like Dragon Ball Evolution or the 2015 Gem and the Holograms movie. And what really sucks was the timing. Besides the problems mentioned with the game itself, it came out during a period when Capcom was starting to neglect Mega Man. Besides no new games, they had just cancelled Mega Man Legends 3 when this came out, so essentially releasing Mega Man as a joke character right after the series was put on ice made the fans feel like it was a taunt. As mentioned, it was more bad timing, so his announcement was met with a lot of scorn, and because of that, I think Capcom wants to bury this idea forever. That being said, in a vacuum, this was a fun character concept, a washed-up space cadet that felt like he was either in a campy Flash Gordon setting or a 1980s cartoon, supported by his arcade mode being this Filmation art style. They did He-Man and Masters of the Universe. Look at Roll, she looks like Panty if she was in Gem and the Holograms. I see how people got insulted by it, but it felt like the developers trying to have some fun. I'm not sure which fighting game bad box art Mega Man belongs in, but if they did it at a different time, maybe it could have hit. And maybe don't attach him to the Mega Man name, just make him like a former TV show actor who's now fighting in a Street Fighter tournament in character. With some of the Street Fighter V character designs, I could see him fitting in there, but regardless, his window of relevancy has passed, and I feel like fans of the related franchises are happy he's never coming back.
Take this! Mega Buster! Victory is mine! Blue team wins!
Number 7. Arden Lin from Star Wars Masters of Terraskasi, or however you pronounce that. I've never had to say it before. The fact that there was a Star Wars fighting game feels like something that should have been a big deal, but it ended up just being a random 3D fighting game that felt like everything else that came out in the late 90s. Outside of the iconic characters, it had a super meter and cool life bars. That's about it. The game came out in 1997, which was an awkward time for a Star Wars game. It was basically basically the furthest point out between the end of the original trilogy and the start of the prequels in 1999, so they were missing out on an opening of new potential characters. But hey, it wouldn't have mattered since this game's story took place after the first movie, so it only used characters from episode 4 and 5. But in a roster full of the most famous Star Wars characters like Luke, Leia, Han Solo, Boba Fett, etc., they actually centered the game around a new character. The main character was a woman with a cybernetic arm named Arden Lin. She was hired by the Emperor to take out members of the rebel forces in one-on-one fights, using an ancient martial arts technique known as Teras Kasi. Once again, no idea how to pronounce that. And what are her secret techniques? I don't know, she hits you with her metal arm and does these red blasts. Her design was cool, but when playing the Star Wars fighting game, she was last on my priority list. I wanted to play as the characters I knew. That being said, there are plenty of Star Wars video games with original characters, so that's not entirely fair. Arden was more plagued by the game itself. It was stiff, so no characters really had flashy moves. They all relied on their imagery to get you to play them. There was also another original character in this game who was a Tusken Raider named Hoar, or is it pronounced
Or versus Boba Fett. Or.
Even though he was an original character made for this game, he could have just been called generic Tusken Raider and he would have been no different. Arden did get some new lore years later, to which I say, good for her. It's expanded universe Star Wars lore, so it's not something I want to dive into, but it's great for the fans.
Knockout.
I shall be triumphant.
Number 6. Labris from Persona 4 Arena. I always underestimate how much I like Persona 4 Arena. I played it a lot when it came out, and I always enjoy putting it in entries. That being said, I never played any of the main games in the franchise, but I could always tell that Labris was a special character made for this game. She's all over it. The game is full of visual novel story modes with each character and occasional fighting, and it ends with you fighting Labris until, shocker, she's actually the protagonist, and you have half a story mode left with each character, along with a full Labris story mode to play now, which is just a multi-hour long visual novel with exactly one fight. It's mainly meant to make you feel emotions, since it's all about how Labris was a robot designed to kill shadow clones, but first needs to destroy other test units of her model. However, one attains sentience and tells Labris how she wants to do real girl things, forming a sisterly bond with Labris, but in a twist you could probably see coming, she ends up being one of the robots Labris needs to kill in testing, and despite how telegraphed that was, I still feel bad, probably the 2-hour investment. And thus, Labris gained full sentience, and her inner Tao created a shadow form, who's also an original character for this game's roster, so consider her tied for this entry. We also learned the Shadow created this alternate world for Labris, where she thinks she's human and the student council president, just like her found sister wanted to be, until the other characters knock her out of it. So this game is one part new adventures with old characters, and one part Labris being the center of attention. Also more story in the game's sequel, but I never played that story, so we're ending it here. As for her moveset, it's all about the motorized axe. She swings it, she zooms it, she uses her persona to fire off red spikes, which is not related to the axe but it's cool, and she can use it as a jetpack, which is not something she does during battle, but it's my favorite part about it. Number 5. Versusia from Grand Blue Fantasy vs. Rising. Grand Blue Fantasy is a franchise that includes a gacha mobile game, an RPG, and of course a fighting game. They're all fantasy knights and angels and people with slashy weapons or even their bare hands on the roster, but every time I try to dive into the story, there's always so much going on between the games that I get confused and just stick to the bios and in-game lines with each other to see what the characters are all about. However, if there's one character that I can tell was made for this game, it's Versusia. Not only does her design feel much more elaborate than the rest of the cast, helping her stick out, but they named her Versusia. They named the original character in a Versus game Versusia. That's like the sitcom joke where you need a fake name, so you just take the syllables or add letters to the first thing that you see and make up a name. Yeah, her name is Versusia. From what I understand in the story, she was a priestess who became the divine guardian of the dragon god Bahamut, but then she was split into her human form and god form, with the latter form being locked away, so the human form Rain led a journey to find her missing half and become a full god weapon again. With her boss powers, she can overwhelm you big time. Her main game plan when fighting is access to her skill Celestial Domain. It's a buff that allows you to do follow-ups to all of her big attacks. Like with a wave of her hand, she can make pillars erupt from below, but using the Celestial follow-up, a bolt of lightning will strike down afterwards. Then Nimbus creates a diagonal pillar, with the Celestial follow-up letting her pursue her foe immediately. The attack Samsara is a lunge forward, and the Celestial follow-up there is a cool-ass mouth beam. Finally, Anitya is a ball of energy, with a follow-up letting her teleport to the opponent and give him a good ol' stomp. And going over these attacks individually does not do her justice. When you see her juggle with pillars or combo you with chaos, she gives off that boss vibe with ease, and that's without giving you the crazy hands in her supers. Even though I made her name sound silly, she's anything but that in battle.
By my life, as all things were conceived How? There is none that can define providence.
Player 1, win.
Number 4. Midler in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Heritage for the Future. I love Heritage for the Future on principle alone, as in 90s sprite animations by Capcom, and giving manga characters that would probably get no love otherwise some great fighting game movesets. It took part 3 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and pretty much adapted every character they could into the concept of a one-on-one fighting game, or I guess 2-on-2 counting the stands. They were even able to make characters with no fighting skill like Devo or Alessi into fighters, and the game really did make them cool. Well, nothing's gonna make Alessi cool, but just viewing his moveset in a vacuum in this game, he is pretty neat. Some characters really were unadaptable in a fighting game setting, but they were at least included in the game's imagery otherwise. When evaluating every stand power, Capcom felt the stand High Priestess had strong potential as a fighter. It has the power to turn into or assimilate with any mineral, so its user Midler controlled it from a distance and used it for general trickery, where it disguised itself as inanimate objects in the protagonist's submarine, and when it was time to strike, she turned it into various sharp objects, and eventually the ocean floor, in which she would chomp them with it. That though led to her downfall, since Jotaro just punched through the teeth, which affected Midler from afar and knocked her out, so when we finally saw her in person, it was in the distance face down for a single panel, and she was left there unconscious. Theoretically, I would consider her never being seen, and she only spoke through her stand from a distance. Still, with the ability to shapeshift into weapons and being an aggressive little thing overall, Capcom was all in on making this unseen woman a fighter. They allegedly went to the JoJo's creator Hirohiko Araki and asked him to design Midler so she could fight in the game, and he did. Completely ignoring the generic woman design from a distance in the manga, he gave her an outfit that fits right into the bizarre part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The most notable aspect of her outfit to me is the star theme. JoJo's is of course no stranger to stars, but I love that star bikini and the star Huzima what sits on her headpiece. As for a fighter, Midler was a blank slate. They could do anything they wanted with her fighting style without the stand. Since she still summons High Priestess quickly for many of her basic melee attacks, Midler herself is really there for mobility. She is fast, her dashes are quick, her jumps cover a lot of range in a short amount of time, and I like the range on her kicks. The kicks are a great way to interrupt the opponent. Also aesthetically, I just like her different poses during battle, they're fun. And for High Priestess, they took a lot of creative liberties with the whole shape-shifting angle. They of course got creative with its weapons from the manga, like the harpoon and razor blades, and I love that it just becomes the ground for a super to do the bitey bite. But someone on the team really liked vehicles for its new stuff. It launches with a bulldozer, and for her most useful super, it turns into cars that just come up from the ground one after the other to juggle the opponent. I don't remember anything like this happening in the manga. I think they completely made it up. I know any mineral is very broad, but I love their direction here. So Midler, even though she existed when Capcom licensed the game, they took a character who was basically nothing, gave her a body, and created a fighter who to me is truly iconic. Number 3, Mr. Game & Watch from Super Smash Bros. The Game & Watch were Nintendo's handheld gaming devices from the 80s. Each one had a different game with elevating difficulty, and they were simple but fun games where you rack up points. Stuff like capturing sunken treasure by avoiding an octopus, or killing bugs that get progressively faster, or just juggling balls that increase in speed, which I played a lot as a bonus game on the Game Boy camera. They were before my time, but I had the manhole game for the e-reader on the Game Boy Advance, where you had to prevent multiple people on 2 different walkways from falling down an open manhole by plugging them up constantly. So by default, that one and juggling were my favorite Game & Watches. They're a part of history, but probably not something you remember the characters from. However, as a major surprise in the Super Smash Bros. Series, these handhelds got a rep with Mr. Game & Watch. With the Smash Bros. Series being Nintendo's big fighting crossover, they try to fit in as many reps from all over their history, and I guess that includes the Game & Watch series. I always assumed it was just a different generic guy in each of these Game & Watch games, and I think that's right. No one thought of the backstory of the Game & Watch characters for obvious reasons, so to represent the person that appeared in these Game & Watch games, they created this human-shaped figure with stilted movements like the Game & Watch, who had the power to materialize the items and people from the games out of nowhere. They even made him 2D and about as heavy as a piece of paper to represent how the games were played with an LCD screen, with his noises all being simple sound effects from the 80s technology. The older versions of Mr. Game & Watch just had the character wield all the items and people while keeping his shape, but in Smash Bros. Ultimate, he now turns into the specific characters from each reference. Like, I'm amazed at the creativity here. They really found a way to get every Game & Watch game in here. I can't go over all of them or else this would be like a 10-minute entry, but my favorites are the fire, oil bucket counter, downwards key, and the infamous hammer, which is from a Game & Watch game of chance, where characters hit each other with a hammer and hope for a higher value of 1 through 9, and each value in Smash Bros. Is a stronger effect, with 9 being massive damage that should lead to an instant knockout. It cheeses wins and makes your friends hate you. And of course, the manhole cover and juggling as his throw are big nostalgia for me, so I love those in Smash Bros. As well. It's funny how without Mr. Game & Watch, I don't think the Game & Watch would be as well known today. Nintendo would still bring it out for game collections and references, but I would not expect people to be asking for a Game & Watch representation in the Smash Bros. Series outside of some niche lists on the internet. Now though, Mr. Game & Watch is a must for Smash Bros. He's been around since 2001. I can't imagine the series without him, just like how no one would have been suggesting Rob if it wasn't for his Smash Bros. Form. So go on, crazy 2D man, show your opponents the power of flatness.
Mr. Game & Watch wins!
Number 2, Android 21 from Dragon Ball FighterZ. For Dragon Ball FighterZ, Bandai Namco wanted the co-developer Arc System Works to come up with a creative moveset for a character never seen before. With it being a more traditional fighting game for the Dragon Ball franchise, we got the standard fare of Dragon Ball Z characters and eventually characters from Super, but for an original villain for the story and gameplay, they got Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama to design a new android, number 21. For the sake of being non-canon, her own memory is a bit muddled in the story to what her true origin is, but the consensus is she's a new model of bio-android that's constantly learning, and she has aspects of the 3 big Z villains after Vegeta since she's a video game final boss. She has the death beams and balls of Frieza, the attack copying of Cell, and the candy beam and sweet tooth of the Majin Buu line, along with an overall Majin look since the Buu DNA overpowers her body more. Besides the fun of her candy beam, her big gimmick is the connoisseur cut, where she grabs and energy slashes the opponent, and depending on who she uses it on, she gets new attacks. Goku or a Roshi student gives her the Kamehameha and Solar Flare, a non-Goku Saiyan gives her a Ki Blast Barrage, an android gives her a Double Blast and Barrier, and the rest of the alien-like characters give her a slow-moving Homing Blast. Her default android form was also playable later, known as Lab Coat 21, and this form form is more of a jack of all trades. She's got the ki blasts, energy swords without the move stealing, anti-airs, and a strong pressure game with highs into lows and stuff that feels like it reaches full screen. She was busted for a while where she was the best character in the game, but Dragon Ball Fighter's balance changes a lot, so I don't know where she is now. Regardless, the Majin form is my favorite due to moveset and design, but overall, Android 21 is interesting to me due to her lore implications. She's not just some random design, she's based on Dr. Giro's wife, with Dr. Giro being the creator of the androids. I assume she either died young or he modeled her after his wife at a younger age, while Giro made his android form look like how he was when he created the androids as an old man. And the fun of this is, Toriyama used this for the lore. While Android 21 is a video game exclusive, Giro's wife is shown in his family tree in the Dragon Ball superhero movie. And of course, she looks like 21. We learn her name is Vomi and their son's name is Gevo, meaning Gero and Gevo are named after the Japanese onomatopoeia for throwing up, and Vomi is named after the word vomit. These villains will indeed make you sick. That being said, the Majin 21 design is locked away in Dragon Ball FighterZ, excluding some mobile game cameos. Do I want her canon? It would be fun, but for now, I'm just happy I got a chance to play as this hungry, sadistic, crazy lady. Honorable mentions, Shadow Mewtwo from Pokken. So Pokken, the Pokemon fighting game, had all Pokemon from the Pokedex, but they added a second version of Mewtwo corrupted by a Shadow Stone. This was essentially a way to get a second Mewtwo on the roster with an alternate moveset, but hey, it's a version that you can only get in this game. Raindog from Multiverses. You know, if Multiverses, the Warner Bros. Fighting game, was never shut down, he might have made the list, but I never downloaded it or played the game or got footage of it when it existed, so no footage means no entry. The original characters from Neo Geo Battle Coliseum. Basically, this is the big SNK crossover that's not King of Fighters. It's even bigger than that. Haven't played the original characters in this one though, but they look neat. They should bring them back. I want to play them. Aeon from Castlevania Judgment. This guy looks cool and all, but I'm more surprised that there's a Castlevania fighting game that was a Wii exclusive and it was just lost to the sands of time. I even knew about this one already, and I'm still flabbergasted. And Ingrid in Capcom Fighting Evolution. I've discussed this messy crossover before. Ingrid is a gray area since she was made for a different crossover, but they threw her in this one so she wouldn't be wasted. But now she's been retconned into the Street Fighter universe, so I more just view her as a Street Fighter character now. Still, I think she counts for this list.
You win!
For number 1, I had to go with a trio of characters that embodies this topic the best to me. Characters that were made to lead the story of a crossover, even if that story was a bit too hidden behind the appearances of the well-known characters. Number 1, Ruby Heart, Amingo, and Son in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Couldn't do one without the others here, with Marvel vs. Capcom 2 being the big crossover that it was, and essentially being the end of it for the foreseeable future at the time. Don't worry, it was revived a decade later and eventually put in limbo again. Capcom threw everything they had into it for a 56 character roster. It reused a lot of characters, whether it was from previous iterations of the crossover or from other fighting games, but they adjusted those characters for the game's mechanics, and it saved budget and time so we could get some completely new characters. Of course, the Marvel side had to be strictly Marvel characters since they were licensed, so they were all well-known picks or obscure characters that made the cut because they were in previous games, like Capcom's strange yet wholesome obsession with Shuma Gorath, but since Marvel did not care who was on the Capcom side, they got a little weird. While I always felt they padded the roster too much with Street Fighter reps, they made 3 characters for the roster just for this game. Let's start with Son the Third. She's been on 2 other lists of mine where we discussed her food-related powers and her design, so I'll summarize her backstory quickly. Son was a platformer by Capcom in the 80s with a character of the same name based on the Monkey King from Journey to the West, Sun Wukong. The lead character designer of this game reinterpreted Sun Sun as a lady, so they gave her the backstory that it's Sun Sun's granddaughter with the same name to have that connection, and it explains why someone from hundreds of years ago is actually here today, its ancestry, though I don't think anyone questions timeline inconsistencies and non-canon crossovers. She's more agile than her grandfather and does all the quick staff hits and giant monkey stuff and giant food stuff. Once again, I've spoken about her a lot, so I streamlined that a bit. The next original character is a Mingo, who's a big cactus man with a sombrero. This is one of those characters that I feel everyone should love. It's a design that screams fun. He bounces so much. He's so cool. The game's director said for this one, he noticed there were no non-human super animated characters on the Capcom side, so they designed the wackiest thing they could think of. That move where he opens up his head and puts you inside of him as he dances around is amazing to look at, also when he grows a massive cactus plant. Finally, for Ruby Heart, they just wanted there to be a new protagonist for the game that had a Ryu or Cyclops vibe, and she was the design that ultimately took that role. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 does have a story, they just expect you to read it and imagine it with the imagery since there's no arcade endings or anything like that. Ruby Heart senses a dark force taking over the world, and has to gather the strongest living beings to help her, being the heroes and villains of the Marvel and Capcom universes. Now this wasn't as hidden as I made it out to be. Ruby Heart is highlighted in the game's intro, and when it shows the long lineup of Capcom characters, Ruby Heart, Amingo, and Son Son are the first three in line, which I see as them being the leaders. The stage with the ship is meant to be Ruby's and acts as the home base for all the characters traveling to save the world, and the fights are her and her allies trying to convince the other characters to join her. Amingo and Son Son are the main characters she meets on the way, and all the Marvel and Capcom characters are essentially secondary, and that's why there's a desert stage for Amingo's home base, and the swamp is meant to be where Ruby meets Son Son, and you eventually meet the final boss Abyss who's laying waste to the whole world. That being said, I've never been crazy about the stages in this game. Other stages have a barren sense to them to represent Abyss in some areas leaving the world in ruin, and I've played this game for so long, these stages do have some iconicness to them. But when I'm playing a crossover, I like to see stages that represent the franchises. So with story context, I appreciate the thought process behind these stages where they're not just some generic areas. Still, I would have liked to see more Marvel and Capcom in these stages. And as mentioned, the story is so hidden, I would have liked it to be a bit more upfront. I don't need arcade endings for every character, but just something to indicate Ruby Heart is leading the charge besides her being the default character to select and us just assuming things from these stages. And upon winning the arcade mode, we do get a generic resolution with a collage of pictures during the credits of Ruby Heart after the defeat of Abyss, showing the two sides on her ship, and it's such good art. Makes you wonder what these interactions would have been like. Shuma Gorath amicably hanging out, Dr. Doom and Anna Karis, BB Hoodlord not wanting to kill people, the famous Spider-Man Morgan picture. Forget Ruby Heart, show me more of this. Don't take that negatively though. I think Ruby Heart, Son Son, and especially Amingo are welcome additions to the franchise, where it would be cool to see them again in any fighting game. People really want Ruby Heart in a new Darkstalkers game. A pirate with ghosts, sure, fits right in. Also, we just want a new Darkstalkers game. These characters have been dormant for so long, it's led to rumors, like how they're from cancelled games or cut Darkstalkers characters, but the info I got about these characters organically being made for this game is from an archived issue of Arcadia in 2000 when it was coming out, so either people made up stuff about these characters being cut content because it's the internet, or the devs just didn't tell us, but I'm pretty sure it was just rumors on the fanbase's side. So, for being iconic characters that managed to slip right into a prolific fighting game crossover with ease, Ruby Heart and her crew sail to the top of this list.
You win.
Now, what did you think? Were all these original characters welcome, or at least create discussion, or should they have never been made to begin with? And who are some of your favorite characters made for fighting games they didn't belong in, whether I discussed them or not? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.